Zara studied her newest contract. Her target was a human, Eli, an unusual mark in her line of work, assigned to a research station on Orion, a planet celebrated for its ecological diversity and cultural richness. As the galaxy's most feared assassin, she had ventured into many star systems, but Orion promised something different. A landscape alive with color and life, starkly different from the cold, shadowy corners of space she frequented. Upon landing her sleek, unmarked ship in a concealed clearing, Zara made her way to a vantage point outside the research facility. Cloaked in her environment-adaptive gear, she merged with the shadows, her eyes fixed on the entrance, waiting for a glimpse of Eli. Eli, unaware of the danger lurking just beyond his routine, chatted enthusiastically with a colleague about their latest findings. "The data's beyond what we hoped for," Eli said, adjusting his glasses. "If we're right, this could change how we approach interspecies communication." Zara listened intently, using her enhanced auditory scanner to pick up pieces of the conversation. The more she learned, the more her curiosity grew. Eli wasn't just another cog in the galactic machine. He was a pioneer in his field, working passionately for peace. The next day, Zara disguised herself as a visiting scholar and infiltrated the facility. She navigated through the bustling corridors filled with scientists and researchers from various species, all united in their quest for knowledge. She found Eli in a lab, deep in discussion with a female biologist from Zeta Prime. Eli's enthusiasm was infectious, his gestures animated as he explained a complex diagram on a holographic display. "Excuse me," Zara interjected, feigning confusion with her fabricated credentials clipped to her jacket. "I'm looking for Dr. Eli Sanders. I was told he could help with my research on biosignaling." Eli turned, a friendly smile spreading across his face. "That's me. How can I assist a fellow researcher?" His genuine openness caught Zara off guard, stirring an unfamiliar flicker of hesitation within her. "I'm studying adaptive communication methods across species." "I heard you're the expert here," Zara said, sticking to her cover story. Eli nodded, his eyes lighting up. "Absolutely, follow me. We've just isolated a fascinating pattern in the bioluminescent signals of Orion's nocturnal flora. It's quite remarkable how these signals enhance interspecies interactions." As they walked through the labs, Eli shared insights into his work, unaware of Zara's true purpose. His passion for his research was evident, and his respect for life, alien or otherwise, was clear. Zara found herself listening, genuinely interested, a rarity in her line of work. They reached a secluded part of the garden where the bioluminescent plants cast an ethereal glow. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" Eli remarked, observing Zara's reaction. "Each light pattern is a message, an attempt to communicate. Much like us trying to find common ground." Zara nodded, her mission momentarily forgotten. "It is beautiful. In all my travels, I've seen nothing like it." Her response was honest, the first genuine thing she had said since her arrival. Eli smiled, pleased with her appreciation. "It's easy to get caught up in the daily grind and forget the wonders we're working with. Sometimes, it takes a fresh pair of eyes to remind us why we started." As they returned to the lab, Zara knew that completing her mission would not be as straightforward as she had anticipated. Eli was not just a name on a contract. He was a visionary in his own right, dedicated to bridging worlds. Back in her hidden ship, Zara reviewed the data she had collected, her thoughts conflicted. Eli, her target, was now a person to her, and her next steps were shrouded in doubt. For the first time, the shadows she so comfortably inhabited seemed to choke her, urging her to reconsider the path she had so long walked without question. Chapter 2: First Contact. The atmosphere of Orion at night was unlike anything Zara had experienced. The air was rich with the scent of blooming flora, and every surface seemed alive with bioluminescent hues that pulsed gently in rhythm. The shadows she normally called home were cast by shimmering leaves and softly glowing trees, making her usual stealth feel almost conspicuous. She crouched in the underbrush near the research outpost, observing the movements of the team inside. Eli emerged from the facility's side entrance, walking alongside a tall, broad-shouldered human man carrying a portable scanner. The two conversed as they strolled toward a grove of glowing fern-like plants. "So, what are you thinking, Mark? We try isolating the spectrum again?" Eli asked, his voice warm but focused. Mark nodded. "Couldn't hurt. The last test showed a lot of interference, but I think if we tweak the settings, we'll get a clearer signal this time." Eli tapped the edge of his datapad thoughtfully. "I'd rather refine the process now than spend weeks analyzing the wrong data." "Good call. I'll set up the scanner," Mark said, crouching to adjust the device. "You can check the output on your end." From her concealed position, Zara adjusted her gear, amplifying their voices. This was her target, Eli, and she'd been expecting a solitary researcher. Instead, here was a team working in sync, bantering easily. The presence of another man threw her off balance. She would need to plan differently. Eli leaned against a nearby tree, glancing at the scanning device as it hummed to life. "Mark, do you ever think about why we're doing all this? I mean, it's not just about the science." Mark looked up, raising an eyebrow. "Yeah, I think about it. It's because of the discoveries. The potential to help everyone out there understand each other better." "Why?" Eli hesitated, rubbing the back of his neck. "It's just, sometimes I feel like people don't see how connected everything is. These plants communicate in ways we're just beginning to grasp. Imagine if we could apply that understanding on a larger scale." Mark chuckled, adjusting the scanner. "You're getting all philosophical on me, Sanders. Keep that up and you'll have to write a book." "I'm serious," Eli said, his tone soft but determined. "If we can prove how these natural communication methods work, it might open doors, scientifically, culturally. It's not just about publishing a paper. It's about connecting people." Zara shifted uncomfortably in the brush. She had heard countless Marks prattle on about their work, their lives, their dreams. This felt different. Eli's words carried an odd sincerity, a conviction that was hard to dismiss. And Mark, the pragmatic partner, seemed to respect him for it. "All right," Mark said, standing and dusting off his hands. "Scanner's ready. Let's see what this thing's picking up." Eli checked his datapad, and his face lit up. "This is it. The patterns are clear. Mark, look at this. The sequences match what we theorized. An exchange of information at a molecular level." "No kidding." Mark stepped closer, peering over Eli's shoulder. That's something. You think this could be it?" "I do. We'll have to run more tests, of course, but this is the strongest lead we've had. If we can replicate these conditions, we might finally have the breakthrough we've been working toward." Zara watched as the two men high-fived, their excitement palpable even at this distance. She felt an unfamiliar tug of hesitation. Her mission was to neutralize Eli, but he didn't seem like a threat. If anything, he seemed like someone who was trying to make the galaxy a better place, not a worse one. As she pondered her next move, the sound of distant laughter reached her ears. More people were arriving. Zara spotted a group of scientists approaching from the direction of the main outpost. They were carrying lanterns that emitted a soft, golden glow, and their lively chatter blended with the sounds of the nocturnal creatures around them. "Hey, Eli! Mark!" one of them called. "Come on, the festival's starting." "Festival," Zara whispered to herself. Eli turned, a grin spreading across his face. "That's right. Tonight's the Orion Glow Festival. You're coming, Mark." Mark sighed, shaking his head. "You know I don't do festivals." Eli gave him a playful shove. "Come on, it's part of the experience. Besides, you'll blend right in. Look at you, glowing already." The group broke into laughter, and Mark finally relented. "All right, fine. But if someone tries to make me dance, I'm out." As the team headed toward the illuminated clearing where the festival was beginning, Zara followed from a safe distance. This wasn't part of the mission, but something inside her wanted to see more. Eli's enthusiasm, Mark's reluctant humor, and the vibrant energy of the gathering were unlike anything she had encountered before. Zara's orders were clear: terminate Eli. Yet the more she saw, the more she wondered if there was another way. For the first time, she felt the weight of her decisions pressing down on her. and the shadows she relied on for comfort felt less like allies and more like barriers to understanding. Chapter 3: Echoes of Doubt. The festival lights still lingered in Zara's thoughts as she returned to her hidden camp outside the research facility. She was restless, her mind racing as she tried to reconcile her mission with what she had seen and heard. It was just a target, she reminded herself. A job no different from countless others she'd completed. But the growing unease wouldn't leave her alone. A chime from her datapad snapped her out of her thoughts. Zara frowned at the notification. A message from her handler. Message from handler. You've had plenty of time. What's the delay? Neutralize the target before we have to send someone else. Zara gritted her teeth, suppressing a surge of irritation. She knew the rules: no hesitation, no emotion. The mission always came first. Yet Eli's words kept echoing in her mind, mingling with the image of his team's laughter, their camaraderie. It wasn't supposed to matter, but for some reason it did. The following morning, Zara donned her researcher disguise again and headed back to the facility. She slipped into the bustling lab, scanning the room for Eli. Her breath hitched when she spotted him across the lab, sitting at a workstation with Mark. They were engrossed in conversation, oblivious to her approach. All right, so if we recalibrate the sensors to account for the interference, Mark was saying, we might get a cleaner signal. Eli nodded, his brow furrowed in concentration. Makes sense. I'll set up the parameters. Let me know when you're ready to run the next test. Before Zara could decide her next move, a cheerful voice called out from behind her. Hey, you're back. How's the data coming along? She turned to see a young technician with a friendly grin. Zara forced a smile and nodded. It's coming along. I was just looking for Eli. I had a few more questions. Sure, he's right over there, the technician said, gesturing toward the two men. You should ask Mark too. He's our go-to for anything technical. Between the two of them, you'll have all the answers you need. Zara thanked the technician and made her way toward Eli and Mark. As she approached, she caught the tail end of their conversation. So if we can isolate the sequence, we'll have the key, Eli was saying. He glanced up and noticed Zara. Oh, you're back. Need more help with your research? She nodded. If you don't mind, I wanted to understand more about the interference patterns you were discussing. Eli smiled and gestured for her to join them. Sure. Mark, can you pull up the last set of readings? Mark glanced at Zara, his expression neutral but not unfriendly. No problem. You're the one studying biosignaling, right? That's right, Zara said, keeping her voice even. I heard you're the technical expert here. Mark shrugged. Eli's the brains behind this. I just make sure the equipment does what it's supposed to. Eli grinned. Don't let him fool you. Mark's the reason we even have equipment that works. Without him, I'd still be staring at gibberish. Mark rolled his eyes but smiled faintly. You're lucky I like tinkering. As Mark pulled up the data, Eli explained the interference issue to Zara in detail. We're working with a very delicate signal. It's easy to lose clarity, especially when dealing with bioluminescent sources. What we're trying to do is refine the conditions so we can get a stable pattern, one we can replicate. And if you can replicate it, you can expand on the findings? Zara asked, genuinely intrigued despite herself. Exactly, Eli said. Once we have a clear, repeatable pattern, it opens up all kinds of possibilities for communication. The idea is that we might eventually adapt these methods for broader applications. Mark cut in, pointing at the screen. Here, this is the latest set of readings. You see that spike? That's the interference. If we filter that out, the core pattern should look something like this. Zara leaned closer, studying the data. Interesting. What causes the spike? Could be environmental factors, Mark said. Changes in humidity, temperature, even the plants themselves reacting to something. The challenge is isolating the variable that triggers it. Eli added, it's like trying to hear a single voice in a crowded room. We know it's there, but we have to fine-tune our ears to pick it out. Zara nodded slowly. That's fascinating. So, your goal is to improve communication not just between humans and aliens, but even between alien species. That's the dream, Eli said, his voice earnest. If we can understand how these natural systems work, we might be able to bridge gaps we never thought possible. Zara glanced at Mark, who seemed focused on the data but occasionally shot her curious looks. His presence added an unexpected dynamic, a steady, grounded counterpoint to Eli's idealism. She hadn't planned for this, working alongside them, listening to their insights, but it was drawing her further into their world. As the conversation continued, Zara felt her resolve waver. This wasn't just another mission anymore. Eli and Mark were more than targets. They were people with a purpose, people trying to make a difference. And the more she got to know them, the more she questioned her own role in all of it. She left the facility that afternoon with a mind more conflicted than ever. The doubts that had been mere whispers were now growing louder, and Zara couldn't shake the feeling that her mission had just become much more complicated. Chapter 4. The Hunted Becomes the Hunter. Zara was no stranger to the feeling of being followed. The sense of eyes on her, the faint sound of footsteps just a moment too late to match her own. She recognized these signs well. But it was an unwelcome sensation for someone used to being the one doing the stalking. She had slipped back into the cover of the dense Orion forest after her latest visit to the research lab. Though she told herself it was just reconnaissance, she knew she had lingered too long. Eli's enthusiasm for his work, Mark's dry sense of humor, and their easy camaraderie had disarmed her more than she cared to admit. But the realization that someone else was now hunting her stripped away any notion of safety. Her first instinct was to confront the threat head-on. She crouched in the shadow of a massive tree, its luminous leaves casting pale light across the undergrowth, and waited. The forest was alive with soft hums and clicks from Orion's nocturnal wildlife. Zara tuned them out, focusing on the faint sound of movement, too measured to be an animal, too cautious to be an ordinary researcher. Minutes passed. The sound grew closer. "Lost something?" she called out, her voice sharp in the stillness. Silence, followed by a faint rustle. She stood slowly, pivoting to face the direction of the noise. "Come on, show yourself," she added. "I'd hate to think someone traveled all this way just to be shy." A tall figure emerged from the shadows. He wore dark, featureless gear and carried himself with the easy confidence of someone who had done this 1,000 times before. Zara's pulse quickened as she recognized the bearing of a trained operative. Someone like her. "Zara," the man said, his tone smooth. "Long time." She didn't lower her guard. "Longer than I'd like. Why are you here, Garan?" Garan was another freelancer, though his reputation was less pristine than Zara's. Where she had built her career on precision and efficiency, he was known for brute force and collateral damage. She'd worked with him once, years ago, and had no interest in repeating the experience. "You went dark after taking this contract," he said, ignoring her question. "Word is you're having second thoughts." "Word travels fast," she replied, keeping her voice neutral. "What are you doing on Orion?" He smirked, taking a step closer. "You know how it goes. The client gets nervous, sends a backup, just in case their top assassin can't follow through." Her grip on the knife at her side tightened. "Backup? You mean a cleaner?" Garan shrugged, the smirk never leaving his face. "I'm here to finish the job, Zara. Either you step aside and let me do it, or we can have a little disagreement. Your choice." She took a slow, deliberate step forward. "I don't take orders from you, and I don't need you meddling in my contract." "It's not your contract anymore," he said. "You hesitated. They noticed. Now it's my turn." "I never hesitated," she lied, her voice cold. "I was biding my time, gathering intel." "You're the one interfering." Garan laughed, a short, harsh sound. "Sure, whatever you tell yourself. Look, we can do this the easy way or the hard way. But I have my orders. And frankly, I don't care what you think." Her knife flashed in her hand, the blade catching the faint light of the forest. "You're not going near him," she said, her tone leaving no room for doubt. He tilted his head, studying her. "Interesting. You actually care about the target, don't you?" Her silence was all the confirmation he needed. "Thought so," he said, his grin widening. Makes this more fun. But I'll give you one last chance. Stand down or I'll take you out too. Zara's response was a sudden burst of movement. She lunged forward, her knife arcing toward him. Garan blocked it, the sound of steel meeting steel ringing through the air. He retaliated with a swift punch, but she dodged, spinning away and slashing at his side. The two moved in a deadly dance, their training evident in every precise strike encounter. Garan was strong, his blows heavy and deliberate, but Zara's speed and agility kept her just out of reach. The fight was fast, brutal, and silent save for the occasional grunt or the clash of weapons. Finally, Zara managed to twist his arm, disarming him and sending his blade clattering to the ground. She pressed her knife to his throat, her breath coming fast but steady. "Call it off," she said, her voice low and firm. "Tell them you didn't find me. Tell them you couldn't get to the target. Or I finish this here." Garan smirked, even with the blade at his throat. "You really have gone soft." She pressed the knife just a little harder. "Try me." After a tense moment, he raised his hands in mock surrender. "Fine, I'll play along. But you know this doesn't end here. They'll send someone else. They always do." Zara didn't lower her knife. Erring into the shadows, Zara stood alone in the glowing forest, her heart still pounding. The encounter had changed everything. She wasn't just an assassin on a mission anymore. She was a woman fighting to protect someone she barely knew, against a system she had always served without question. The shadows felt different now. They weren't just a place to hide. They were a reminder of how far she had come, and how far she might still fall. Chapter 5: Nightfall Whispers. The ruins were hidden deep in Orion's vast northern forest, where the bioluminescent glow of the flora gave way to darker shades. Broken stone structures jutted out from the earth, remnants of a long-forgotten civilization that had thrived here long before any interstellar explorers arrived. Zara and Eli moved carefully through the ancient corridors, their footsteps muffled by a thick carpet of moss. Mark followed close behind, his hand on his sidearm as he scanned the shadows for movement. "I still don't understand why we had to come all the way out here," Mark muttered, his voice low but laced with frustration. "We could have stayed at the lab and worked through the data." Eli adjusted his glasses, glancing back at Mark. "Because the lab's compromised. You saw what happened. Whoever attacked us isn't going to stop just because we've gone quiet. Out here, we have a chance to regroup, figure out our next move." Mark snorted. "And you think these ruins are safer? This place looks like it's been abandoned for centuries. Who knows what's lurking around?" "That's precisely why we're here," Eli replied calmly. "No one would think to look for us in a place like this." Zara, who had remained silent for most of the trek, finally spoke. "He's right. This location gives us cover. It also gives us time to assess the situation." Mark raised an eyebrow. "Assess the situation? You mean while we wait for whoever is hunting us to catch up?" Eli sighed. "Mark, I know you don't trust her, but it's not about trust," Mark cut in. "It's about survival. This woman shows up out of nowhere, we get attacked, and now we're running for our lives into the middle of nowhere. Excuse me if I'm not exactly on board with this plan." Zara turned to face him, her expression cold and steady. "I didn't ask for your trust, but if you want to make it out of this alive, you'll do well to listen. You're both alive right now because I was there when the attack happened. If I hadn't intervened, you'd be another set of casualties." Mark glared at her, but he didn't argue. He knew she was right, even if he didn't like admitting it. Eli stepped between them, his hands raised slightly in a placating gesture. "Okay, enough. We're all on edge. Let's just focus on setting up a defensible position and figuring out what to do next." The trio continued deeper into the ruins, finding a central chamber that was relatively intact. The ceiling was mostly collapsed, allowing a dim, natural glow to filter through. Broken columns leaned against one another like weary sentinels, and strange carvings adorned the walls, alien symbols that none of them recognized. Eli set his bag down and began unpacking equipment. Mark took up a position near the entrance, his weapon at the ready. Zara moved to a vantage point on a crumbled ledge, scanning the area for any sign of movement. The quiet was almost oppressive, broken only by the occasional sound of nocturnal creatures stirring in the distance. After a few minutes, Mark broke the silence. "So, what's the plan? Sit here and hope they don't find us?" Zara turned her gaze to him. "The plan is to stay alive. We can't do that if we rush out blindly. We need to figure out who's after us and why. Once we know that, we can decide how to move forward." Mark frowned but didn't respond. Eli, busy examining the carvings on the walls, finally spoke up. "These symbols, they're fascinating. This place must have been part of an advanced civilization. The architecture, the precision of these carvings, it's incredible." Zara raised an eyebrow. "Focus, Sanders. We're not here to study the ruins." Eli glanced at her, a small smile tugging at his lips. "Can't help it. It's in my nature to be curious. Even now, in the middle of all this." Mark rolled his eyes. "Curiosity killed the cat, Eli." Eli shrugged, still studying the carvings. "And satisfaction brought it back." Zara smirked slightly despite herself. "Let's hope your curiosity doesn't get us all killed." The banter eased some of the tension, though it didn't fully dispel it. They worked together to secure the chamber, rigging a basic perimeter alarm system using Mark's portable sensor kit. As night deepened, the ruins grew colder. The temperature dropped, sending a chill through the air. They sat around a small, contained heat source Eli had brought. Mark remained quiet, his focus still on guarding the entrance. Eli, however, couldn't help but break the silence. "You know," he said, glancing at Zara, "I never expected to end up here. Back at the lab, I thought my biggest problem would be data corruption or a busted scanner. Now we're out here, in an ancient ruin, running for our lives. Kind of puts things in perspective." Zara leaned back against the crumbling wall, her eyes scanning the room. "Life rarely goes the way we expect it to. The question is how you handle it when it doesn't." Eli nodded. "I guess you've had your fair share of unexpected situations." Zara met his gaze, and for a moment, the mask she always wore seemed to falter. "More than you know." The quiet words hung between them, unspoken stories hinting at a past she didn't care to share. Eli didn't press, but the look in his eyes said he understood more than she expected. Mark, watching from his position by the entrance, raised an eyebrow at their exchange but said nothing. As the night wore on, Zara felt the weight of her doubts more heavily than ever. She wasn't used to working with others, much less relying on them. Yet here she was, thrown into a fragile partnership with two men who trusted her about as far as they could throw her. It was unfamiliar territory, but she couldn't deny that their survival depended on staying together. Chapter 6. United Front. The dense forest gave way to the shimmering skyline of Zyber, a sprawling metropolis of gleaming spires and endless activity. Zara, Eli, and Mark stood on a ridge overlooking the city, the hum of its bustling energy reaching them even from miles away. Their journey from Orion had been tense, filled with near misses and hushed arguments, but now they were here. The place where Zara believed they could expose the conspiracy threatening Eli's life and, perhaps, dismantle the syndicate that had been pulling the strings. Mark squinted at the city below. "So that's Zyber. I always thought it was just a fancy trading hub. Didn't expect it to look so industrial." "It's more than a trading hub," Eli said, adjusting his pack. "Zyber is a communications powerhouse. Every signal in the sector passes through this city. If we can tap into their network and broadcast what we've found, we can bring the whole operation into the light." Zara remained quiet, scanning the horizon. She knew the risk. They weren't just walking into any city, they were walking into the heart of her former employer's control. But she had no choice. If they didn't act now, the syndicate would keep coming until Eli was silenced, and she wasn't about to let that happen. "Let's move," Zara finally said, leading the way down the slope. Chapter 7. Revelation and Revolution. The trio moved cautiously through Zyber's chaotic lower levels, where the city's polished, shimmering skyline gave way to grimy alleys and sprawling industrial zones. The transmission of the syndicate's secrets had sent shockwaves through the city. Screens on the streets blared snippets of the leaked data, and public outcry was mounting. Crowds gathered, their voices raised in anger. Eli had been right. The revelations were igniting something far larger than any of them had anticipated. "Did you see that?" Mark said, pointing to a nearby public screen. It displayed a news anchor urgently recounting the details of the leaks. "They're actually talking about it. People are furious." Eli nodded, his expression a mix of relief and apprehension. "That's the point. If enough people push back, the syndicate won't be able to sweep this under the rug." Zara, walking a step ahead, kept her attention on their surroundings. "Don't celebrate yet. The syndicate won't just stand by and let this happen. We need to keep moving." Mark frowned. "What, so we just run? We've done what we came to do." She turned, fixing him with a steady gaze. "No, we've started something. If we don't see it through, they'll bury the story, silence the people speaking out, and hunt us down before we can do anything else." Eli stepped in before Mark could respond, his voice calm but firm. "She's right. We're not finished. This isn't just about exposing them. It's about making sure they can't come back from it." Mark sighed, running a hand through his hair. "All right, so what's the plan? We just keep running until they're toppled." Zara glanced at Eli, then back to Mark. "Not running. We take this fight to them. The syndicate's power comes from control over information, over people's lives. We just took the first step in breaking that control. Now we have to keep the pressure on." They took refuge in an abandoned warehouse on the edge of the industrial district. It was a crumbling structure filled with rusted machinery and broken crates, but it offered them a chance to catch their breath and strategize. Eli spread out a digital map of the city on a makeshift table. "There's more we can do. The syndicate's infrastructure is built into Zyber's network. We hit their communication hubs, their data stores. We keep their leadership scrambling." Mark leaned against a nearby stack of crates, his arms crossed. "You make it sound simple, but what happens if we get caught? We've already painted targets on our backs." Zara stepped forward, her voice low but resolute. "That's the risk we take. They're not going to stop coming after us anyway. At least this way we're not just surviving, we're fighting back." Mark held her gaze for a moment, then shrugged. "Fine. But don't expect me to go down quietly if things go south." Eli tapped on the map, highlighting several locations. "We start with their central node. It's heavily secured, but if we can get inside and disrupt it, we'll cripple their ability to coordinate." Zara nodded. "Good. We'll move out at first light." As they settled in for the night, the tension between them began to ease. Mark paced near the entrance, keeping watch, while Eli and Zara reviewed the map and discussed their approach. Their hushed voices filled the space, a mixture of strategy and cautious optimism. After a while, Mark finally spoke up. "You know, if someone had told me I'd end up part of a rebellion against a galactic syndicate, I would have laughed them out of the room." Eli chuckled. "Funny, I was just thinking the same thing. But here we are." Zara didn't laugh, but she allowed herself a small smile. "Strange how things turn out. I never thought I'd be working with humans," Mark finished, smirking. "People," she corrected, her tone even. "People who actually care about something bigger than themselves." Eli looked up from the map, meeting her gaze. "Why did you change sides, Zara? You could have just finished the job and walked away. But you didn't." She hesitated, then shrugged. "Let's just say I got tired of doing their dirty work. I saw something different in you too." Mark gave a low whistle. "That's about as close to a compliment as we're going to get." "Huh?" Zara didn't answer, but the faintest hint of a grin tugged at her lips. The next day, the team set out before dawn, moving carefully through the waking city. The streets were quieter than the previous night, but the tension was palpable. People whispered in hushed tones, and the occasional display screen still flickered with news of the leaks. The central node was housed in a heavily fortified building, its entrance guarded by armed personnel. The plan was simple in theory. Zara would handle the guards, Eli would breach the system, and Mark would provide backup. In practice, it was far more dangerous. Zara took out the perimeter guards with swift, precise movements, her training as an assassin serving them well. Once inside, Eli hacked into the terminal while Mark kept watch. The building's cold, sterile corridors amplified every sound, keeping them all on edge. "Hurry up, Eli," Mark muttered, his weapon ready. "We won't have long before reinforcements show up." "I'm going as fast as I can," Eli replied, his fingers flying over the console. "This encryption is more advanced than I thought." Zara stood nearby, her eyes fixed on the hallway. "Just keep at it. I'll handle anyone who comes this way." Minutes dragged on as Eli worked, and the tension in the air grew heavier. Finally, he let out a small triumphant noise. "Got it. We're in." Mark glanced back. "Great. Now can we get out of here before?" An alarm blared, cutting him off. Zara cursed under her breath. "Too late. Move." The three of them bolted for the exit, but their way was quickly blocked by more guards. Zara drew her weapon and engaged, her movements fluid and deadly. Mark covered her, picking off targets with practiced aim. Eli, clutching the stolen data, stayed close behind, his mind racing. They managed to break through the blockade and escape into the chaos of the city streets. Sirens wailed in the distance, but they kept moving, disappearing into the maze of alleys and hidden passages. When they finally stopped to catch their breath, Eli looked at Zara and Mark. "We did it. We hit them where it hurts." Zara nodded, her expression hard but determined. "We're not done yet, but this was a good start." Mark grinned, despite the tension. "Well, I'll be damned. We might actually stand a chance." They entered Zyber under the cover of darkness, blending into the constant flow of workers and travelers. The city was alive with lights, holographic advertisements flashing on every surface. Hovercars buzzed overhead, and the streets were crowded with people from every corner of the galaxy. Mark stuck close to Eli, scanning their surroundings. "Where exactly are we going?" he asked Zara. "There's a data center on the east side of the city," Zara said. "It's heavily guarded, but I know a way in." Mark gave her a skeptical look. "Heavily guarded, huh? Sounds like a great plan. Do you have a better one?" Zara shot back, her tone sharper than she intended. "Because standing around isn't going to keep us safe." Eli stepped between them. "All right, calm down. Let's just focus on getting there first." The three of them weaved through the city, avoiding security patrols and sticking to back alleys whenever possible. Zara led them with precision, her familiarity with Zyber's layout apparent. Mark kept his weapon close, his unease growing with every turn. "You sure you're not leading us into a trap?" Mark asked, his voice low. Zara stopped abruptly and turned to face him. "If I wanted you dead, you wouldn't be standing here." Eli placed a hand on Mark's shoulder. "She's helping us, Mark. Let it go." Mark grumbled something under his breath but followed Zara as she continued down a narrow passageway. At last, they reached a small maintenance entrance on the side of a massive structure. The building loomed above them, its metal surface reflecting the neon lights of the city. Zara gestured to the door. "This is our way in. Once we're inside, we'll head to the main control room. From there, we can upload the data." Mark frowned. "And what happens when security shows up?" "We'll cross that bridge when we come to it," Zara replied. "Right now, we just need to get inside." Eli nodded. "Let's do it." The interior of the data center was cold and sterile, filled with rows of servers and endless corridors. The faint hum of machinery surrounded them as they moved cautiously through the facility. Zara led the way, her movements confident and deliberate. "Stay close," she whispered, glancing back at Eli and Mark. "Security here is automated, but that doesn't mean it's easy to bypass." Mark's grip on his weapon tightened. "Just tell me what I need to shoot if it comes down to it." Eli shot him a look. "We're not shooting anything unless we have to." Zara smirked faintly. "Let's hope it doesn't come to that. Follow me." As they approached the main control room, the tension in the air was palpable. Zara hacked into a side panel, her fingers moving quickly over the controls. A soft beep signaled the lock's release, and the door slid open. Inside, the control room was a sprawling hub of terminals and holographic displays. Eli stepped forward, his gaze sweeping over the room. This is it. If we can get the data into their network, we can send it across the entire sector. Mark stood guard at the door while Eli and Zara worked at one of the consoles. The data they had collected from the Syndicate's files was damning. Evidence of illegal operations, bribery, and numerous assassinations. Eli's hands moved quickly as he prepared the files for upload. Zara glanced at him. Are you sure about this? Once we do this, there's no going back. Eli met her gaze. If we don't do it, more people will get hurt. This is the right thing to do. She nodded, her expression unreadable. Then let's finish it. As Eli initiated the upload, the room's lights flickered, and a loud alarm blared. Zara cursed under her breath. They've detected us. We need to hold them off until the upload completes. Mark raised his weapon. Finally, something I can do. The doors to the control room hissed open, and a pair of robotic security drones rolled in, their weapons glowing ominously. Mark fired the first shot, hitting one of the drones and causing it to spark and stumble. Zara joined him, her own weapon precise and efficient. Eli, how much longer? Zara shouted over the commotion. Almost there, he called back, his hands flying over the console. Mark took down the second drone, but the sound of approaching footsteps indicated more were on the way. We're running out of time here. Zara moved to the door, firing at the reinforcements. Just hold them off. The seconds felt like hours, but finally, Eli turned from the console, his face lit with determination. It's done. The data's out. Then we move, Zara said. Now. The three of them bolted from the control room, sprinting through the labyrinth of corridors as more drones and guards closed in. Zara led them through a side exit she had scouted earlier, and they emerged into the night, the city's lights once again surrounding them. As they caught their breath in a secluded alley, Eli looked at Zara. Did it work? Will the data reach everyone? She nodded. It'll take some time, but it's out there now. They can't stop it. Mark leaned against a wall, his weapon still in hand. So, what now? Zara glanced at them both, her expression serious. Now we see what they do with it. Chapter 8, Dawn of a New Era. As dawn broke over Zyber, the city's towering spires reflected the first rays of sunlight, giving the chaotic urban landscape a fleeting golden glow. The trio Zara, Eli, and Mark had regrouped at an abandoned hangar on the outskirts. The previous day's events weighed heavily on all of them. Exhausted, they huddled around a portable turret. In the sector, people are calling for the Syndicate's leaders to step down. It's working. Mark leaned back against a rusted cargo crate, still holding his weapon at his side. Working is great, but that also means they're coming for us harder now. They know we're the ones behind it. Zara, standing off to the side with her arms crossed, remained silent. She was watching the entrance, always on edge, always expecting someone to burst through at any moment. Her gaze flicked back to Eli. Do we have anything solid to protect ourselves if they trace this back? Eli turned to her, his voice steady despite his obvious fatigue. I've scattered the data across multiple nodes. Even if they manage to take down one or two, it won't stop the flow. But you're right. They'll try to find us. They won't just try, Mark interjected. They'll succeed if we don't get moving. Zara nodded. We can't stay here long. We've made them bleed, but they'll regroup. We need to figure out our next move, and fast. Eli closed the terminal and stood up, stretching his back. I agree, but running forever isn't a solution. If we want real change, we have to go after the core of their power. Taking out nodes and hubs is a start, but we need to disrupt their leadership. Make it so they can't recover. Mark looked skeptical. You're talking about a direct strike. You sure we're ready for that? We've barely been keeping ahead of their patrols. Eli nodded. I know it sounds reckless, but we've got momentum now. The more people rally behind the information we've released, the harder it'll be for the Syndicate to maintain control. We need to hit them where it really hurts, their decision-makers. If we can dismantle the upper hierarchy, the rest will crumble. Zara glanced between them. And you think we can pull that off with just the three of us? Not alone, Eli admitted. But we're not alone anymore. People are starting to rise up. We need to make contact with the groups that are already protesting. Organize them. Turn this into something bigger than just us. Mark frowned, tapping the side of his gun. So, we go from being a small team on the run to leading a revolution? I didn't sign up for that. No one signed up for this, Zara said quietly. But you're here, and you've come this far. Are you going to turn back now? Mark met her gaze, his jaw tightening. He looked like he wanted to argue, but after a long moment, he sighed and gave a small nod. Fine, but let's be clear, we need a real plan. No more running blind into their traps. Eli glanced at Zara. You know their methods better than anyone. If we're going to lead this charge, we need your guidance. Zara tilted her head, considering his words. She had spent years working under the syndicate's umbrella, knowing their tactics, their weaknesses, and their strengths. Now, for the first time, she had the opportunity to turn that knowledge against them. It wasn't a decision she had ever expected to face, but it was one she couldn't ignore. I'll help you, she said finally, her voice firm, but I'm not doing this for revenge. If we're going to take them down, we're doing it the right way. No more innocent casualties. No more collateral damage. Eli nodded. Agreed. This is about more than just breaking their power. It's about showing people that there's another way. Mark sighed again, looking between the two of them. Guess I'm in, then. Someone's got to keep you two from getting yourselves killed. A faint smile tugged at Zara's lips. Good. Then let's start planning. The three of them spent the rest of the morning piecing together their strategy. They identified key locations where syndicate leaders operated, as well as potential allies among the growing resistance. Zara outlined the syndicate security protocols, while Mark pointed out practical considerations for avoiding their patrols. Eli focused on how to keep the information flow steady, ensuring that every new revelation reached the public. As the day wore on, they began to see the shape of their next move. It was still a long shot, but for the first time it felt like they had a real chance. They weren't just three individuals running from an unstoppable force. They were a team, united by a shared purpose and a determination to see it through. When the sun set over Zyber, they stood together at the edge of the hangar, looking out at the city. The glowing lights seemed less oppressive now, more like a canvas for the change they were trying to bring. Eli turned to Zara and Mark, his expression serious but hopeful. This is just the beginning. We've come this far and we're not backing down. Whatever happens next, we'll face it together. Zara nodded silently, her gaze fixed on the horizon. Mark crossed his arms, a faint grin tugging at his lips. Well, he said, if we're going to rewrite the rules, we might as well do it right. The three of them exchanged a rare moment of shared understanding. They didn't know what the future held, but they knew one thing for certain. They weren't fighting alone anymore.